Remember in the movie Gravity, George Clooney's character sacrificed himself? Unfastened from the cable and flew into outer space? It's just a movie, but what if this happens in real life? What happens to an astronaut who gets lost in outer space, and have such cases actually happened? Now you will find out. As you know, while on a space station, astronauts are sometimes forced to leave it in order to carry out inspections, repairs, or research. Naturally, they leave the station in spacesuits, but the supply of oxygen in them is limited, so any mistake can lead to death. One of these missteps could be a flight into outer space. A cable and a partner are essentially all that an astronaut can hope for while outside the station. Moreover, in this case, literally centimeters decide. Even if the astronaut accidentally releases the cable and moves away from it only half a meter from the station, he can already be carried into outer space. A body in a state of weightlessness continues endless movement around its axis. If the astronaut did not have time to grab his partner's hand or cling to the cable, he is doomed. The trajectory of the movement depends on the last push from the surface, so the lost astronaut has three options. The first are the most optimistic. Modern spacesuits have special jetpacks with which you can change the trajectory of movement, for example, prevent rotation, stop, or try to move forward. In this case, the astronaut can still save himself by going back to the station. If not, then he still has two options. In the first, he will head towards the ground, enter the gravitational field and begin to fall through the dense layers of the atmosphere. No parachute will be required, since a sharp entry into the atmosphere will finish off the astronaut even before he hits the ground. In the second option, the astronaut will fly into outer space. Oxygen is limited, there is no clothing for survival, so the astronaut will live as long as he has something to breathe. After death, the astronaut's body will float in space for some time, but eventually radiation will begin to destroy it. Ultimately, when the integrity of the suit is compromised, the air remaining in the suit will quickly resolve and cause a small explosion, destroying the suit and the body inside it. Regarding real cases, we can say for sure that not all astronauts returned home alive. In 1961, 18 people died during space flights, 13 Americans, 1 Israeli and 4 Soviet cosmonauts. Disasters occurred either during the launch of spacecraft or during their return from orbit. The statistics are disappointing, but it could be even worse. For example, Alexei Leonov could have died in space orbit. The first man to go into outer space. His spacesuit swelled, and for a long time he could not return to the ship Voskhod 2. Vladimir Vasiutin, a member of the Soyuz T-14 crew, suffered a severe attack of prostatitis in orbit, which is why the entire operation had to be urgently curtailed and returned to Earth. And Italian astronaut Luca Parmitin almost choked during a spacewalk when his helmet suddenly began to fill with water behind a faulty cooling system. Space is not as romantic and cool a place as many people think, and what happened or can happen to astronauts proves this well. But that's not the only reason space is creepy and sinister. Look further to find out even more interesting and frightening facts about space that will make you look at it differently. As you probably know, the first living creature to fly into space was not a person, but an animal. More precisely, numerous launches of several animals were carried out in order to learn more about the possibility of space flights. At first, some testers didn't even think about how animals could return, so, unfortunately, many little animals died in space. Ships with their bodies, or what was left of them, can still plow our orbit and revolve around the Earth. The bodies of animals that fall prey to space deteriorate more slowly in this dark abyss than on our planet. A number of factors play a role here, from the oxygen on the spacecraft to the temperature of space. By the way, what about the temperature? We all know that it's cold in space, but how chilly it is there. Everything is not so simple here. In low orbit, the temperature is quite comfortable, from -4 to +45 degrees Celsius. If we take the average, then this is, in fact, rooms for temperature. However, in outer space, In absolute vacuum, it is incredibly cold. The temperature there is about -270 degrees Celsius. This is practically the lowest temperature possible in the universe, because absolute zero on the Kelvin scale is -273 degrees Celsius. Space frightens not only with its wild cold, but also with its absolute silence. Similar silence can be experienced in an anechoic chamber in the Orfield laboratory. It absorbs up to 99% of sounds, but even there you will not be able to hear absolute silence. It will be disrupted by the work of the lungs and circulatory system, that is, you will literally hear the blood flowing through your veins. There is no sound at all in space, since it does not propagate in a vacuum. It is not surprising that George Lucas gets so much hate for the scenes of space battles in Star Wars. It is not very realistic to look at scenes in which Imperial fighters shoot loudly in a vacuum. But let's not find fault with science fiction films. In reality there are no sounds in space, and this is not just scary in itself. Astronauts can suffer from this. Just a few minutes in a sound vacuum cause panic attacks and severe auditory hallucinations in unprepared people, so astronauts are very carefully prepared for their missions. In general, the work of an astronaut is very difficult. You fly into space for several months, flounder in weightlessness, cannot adequately rest, eat, or sleep, and you also begin to experience health problems. For example, several years ago, scientists proved that vision deteriorates greatly in space. Due to the conditions and features of space, the eyeballs of astronauts are deformed, so this can lead to some complications with vision. When they return home, the fluid around the brain may increase to the point that the astronaut's eyes may become swollen. While in space the astronaut may become nearsighted. Even if he went into orbit with 100% vision, nearsightedness persists upon arrival on Earth, but over time passes. Cosmonauts experience problems not only with vision. In space their skin literally begins to fall off. Being in weightlessness affects the skin, its thickness decreases, so after about a month of being in orbit, calluses begin to fall off from astronauts, and dead and thick skin is also actively shed. This in itself is unpleasant. The skin floats around the station, turning it into chaos. In addition, muscles begin to atrophy in space, because there is no gravitational force here. Moreover, calcium leaves the bones and they become less dense and durable. Astronauts need to exercise every day so as not to fall apart and become frail. Such difficulties probably make the astronauts want to cry. You can't just fly away from space. It's not like flying from one side to another, but people in orbit should show courage and perseverance. Crying in space is a bad idea, and now Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield will demonstrate this. As you can see, the liquid just collects around the eye, like a bubble, and due to the lack of gravity, the tears will not flow down, so the astronaut will have to walk around with such bubbles around the eyes and sob bitterly. At the station this is not such a problem. Tears can be wiped away with your hand or a napkin, but when going into outer space, crying is categorically not recommended. While in a spacesuit, the astronaut cannot wipe his eyes, and due to bubbles and tears around the eyes he practically goes blind, which can affect the success of a mission in outer space or even costs the astronaut his life. The same Chris Hadfield experienced such an experience himself, but fortunately, he solved the problem with tears in outer space with the help of people and with the Mission Control Center on the ground. Unpleasant facts are associated not only with astronauts, but also with celestial bodies. Our natural satellite, for example, is gradually moving away from the Earth, although this happens very slowly, at a speed of 38 mm per year, so this news cannot be called frightening. This is rather an interesting fact. Researchers calculated that approximately 1.5 billion years ago, the Earth's day lasted approximately 18 hours, at that time the Moon was 44,000 kilometers closer to the Earth than it is now. According to astrophysicists, the increased distance affected the rotation of the planet around its axis, and at the same time, the climate and the length of the day, and in a few billion years the orbit of the Moon will approximately double, and the day will stretch to 870 hours, I think. People by that time there won't be any left. Well, while you and I are still alive, and still live on Earth, it is often unsafe here, and dangers can still come from outer space. Solar geomagnetic storm, one of the most terrible things that can happen to us at any moment. Such storms are a disturbance in the geomagnetic field for some period of time. In 1921, a geomagnetic storm disabled half of the equipment of the New York Central Railroad and left almost the entire east coast of the United States without communications. Even then the consequences were noticeable. Nowadays, when the whole world is connected to electronics, a geomagnetic storm can lead to terrible consequences and destroy thousands of lives. But those who don't particularly care about a solar storm are Venus. This neighbor of the Earth is not talked about as often as Mars, because Venus is one of the most unusual and creepy planets not only in the solar system, but also in the universe in general. Although Venus is similar in composition and size to the Earth, its appearance and surface conditions are completely different. The atmosphere of Venus consists of carbon dioxide and sulfuric acid pores. The temperature on the surface exceeds 450 degrees Celsius, which is enough for zinc or lead to melt there. Moreover, due to the fact that the atmosphere of Venus rotates 60 times faster than the surface of the planet, the wind speed here can be up to 500 kilometers per hour. This is a terrible planet, although it's still a long way to get to Mars, but it's much more welcoming. Well, even Venus is not as scary a planet as Kel 9b, it is one of the most frightening planets in the universe, because it is a real hell, and literally Kel 9b is the hottest known exoplanet. The temperature on its day side reaches 4,300 degrees Celsius. Probably some stars are colder than this planetary heat. Kel 9b is generally a crazy and very strange planet. For example, winter and summer here alternate twice in 36 hours, when the planet is above the pole of the star, summer begins on it. Then it moves to the equator and winter comes. The planet then moves to the opposite pole of the star, and summer begins again. Each of these seasons lasts about 10 hours, but there is no particular difference between winter and summer. It is always fiercely hot on Kel 9b. By the way, Kel 9b is located 620 light-years from Earth. It's very far away. Somewhere out there, very far in the universe, there are not only strange planets, but also black holes. Everyone knows about them, but did you know that there are also white holes? Their existence has not yet been 100% proven, but scientists suggest that they may be the exact opposite of black holes if they suck everything into themselves. And they don't even allow light to escape, while white holes, on the contrary, do not absorb anything. Nothing can enter them at all, but they spew out matter. According to one hypothesis, the Big Bang was the result of a white hole explosion. Well, write in the comments which planet you would like to visit, and if you were interested, like and subscribe.